threats on Ben's side. Only the Sneasler, really, because of the clear body on Dragapult and then a bunch of special attackers. Mousehold's not too bad to get intimidated either.
All right, we are off to the races here in Kentucky. Round 2 of the Louisville Regional Championships. Ben Grissmer, Patrick Connors, both these trainers 1-0 right now. Dragapult, Electabuzz for Patrick, Sneasler, Dragapult for Ben.
It's a jet race. Dragapult's on either side. Of course, one of the fastest Pokemon available. It'll be interesting to see if either trainer said, Dragapult's so fast, I can just opt to be trained in attack and sit and go a little bit slower. That would give a big advantage to the other side here. Of course, Sneasler can also get unburdened and try to then outspeed Dragapult and go for a Throat Chop, but Electabuzz can just follow me that away and disrupt it. So probably both Dragapults not really looking to attack each other, but to deal with the partners on the other side.
Follow me from Patrick here on turn 1. Going to redirect any attacks that were towards Patrick's Dragapult and go towards the Electabuzz instead. U-turn will hit into the Electabuzz. Not doing too much damage, but it does allow Ben to pivot the Dragapult out.
Yeah, and Ben's Dragapult moving first here, really valuable information. We'll have to see if that is consistent. But right now it means the NDD gets to come in, activate the Psychic Train, and so activate the Psychic Seed and speed that Sneasler up to then move next.
Thanks to the dynamic speed in the game, mid-turn as Unburdened will activate Sneasler, activating its Psychic Seed ability, boosting its special defense, and now no longer having an item means it will be having double speed. Dire Claw does not get status condition into the Electabuzz, and Draco Meteor lands into Sneasler, gets the two stat drops onto the Dragapult, but does not pick up the KO on Sneasler.
Yeah, some good decision making there for Ben. The not going for the Throat Chop, but understanding that Electabuzz was going to pretty clearly follow me there, and so getting good damage into a Dire Claw, but not going for the close combat that would have meant that Draco Meteor got the KO. The Psychic Seed also necessary to be able to take that Draco Meteor and still get another attack off this turn, and that's the difference between being able to target down the Electabuzz or not this turn.
Indeedee Male on Ben's side will swap out into the Dragapult. Ben feeling confident, not too worried about Patrick's Dragapult on the other side of the field since it did use the Draco Meteor and lower its stats. It wouldn't be doing as much damage on this turn. But the close combat from Sneasler goes into Electabuzz's Protect, so no damage from the Sneasler on this turn. And with the swap of Dragapult, it's going to have to eat this Draco Meteor. It's still super effective, even at -2. The critical hit, Choice Specs critical hit for Dragapult gets the KO.
I have to imagine that's enough damage even without the critical hit. I think a good decision from Pat there to understand the NDD might pivot out, try to be in the back in case the Rillaboom came in the future, and doesn't target the low health Sneasler. Instead gets a really valuable KO onto the Dragapult on the other side, and then critically also protects the Electabuzz. That means that this turn, Electabuzz is still free to follow me and try to keep Dragapult healthy. Delphox, though, is now out on the field. A expanding force into both of these targets would do so much damage and is not really threatened by either of them. But this might be the moment where Rillaboom does need to come in, start disrupting the Psychic Train, lowering the damage output, and turning the expanding force into a single target move.
Right, either the Rillaboom or the Kingambit, potentially, if Patrick brought either of those two Pokemon, are going to help him out a lot, because Rillaboom would set up the Grassy Train, which would get rid of expanding force, not only the extra damage from Psychic Train being on the field, but get rid of that spread attack. It would become a single attack, and Kingambit can't take any damage from expanding force. As a dark type, it is immune to those psychic attacks. Double swap for Patrick on this turn. Wants to keep that support from Electabuzz later on in the match when he brings Dragapult back in at full effect. So will be Kingambit, Rillaboom, as we predicted the final two Pokemon for Patrick, setting up the Grassy Terrain. Sneasler protects here, so a wasted Protect as no attacks will be coming out on Patrick's end. And now expanding force is only single target, and because he specifically hit the right slot, that's a dark type taking no damage.
Such a valuable turn for Pat. He gets good damage trading out of the first couple turns. His Dragapult wins the Dragapult fight, the other one goes down, and then manages to perfectly pivot out of that situation, getting a double switch where he takes no damage. Now has control of the terrain, has the Rillaboom in and Kingambit in to fight, but of course, both those Pokemon, weak to Heat Wave. There's another multi-target move available from Delphox that could do so much damage. You can only Terastallize one or the other. Of course, Rillaboom would very much like to get off the field again to be able to set a Grassy Train again in the future when the NDD comes out on the other side. And then Sneasler, no slouch here either, threatening big damage into both, so it may force a Grassy Glide into that slot just to make sure a close combat doesn't come out. So the pivot happens, gets Dragapult off the field, but still a strong position for Ben.
No swap out for Patrick on this turn. Will Terastallize Rillaboom into a fire type. If Ben went for the Heat Wave, that goes from super effective to resisted damage onto the Rillaboom. Sucker Punch will land into Sneasler because there is no Psychic Terrain. Sneasler Sneasler gets KO'd from that Sucker Punch. Ben down to his last 2 Pokemon. Heat Wave from the Delphox is not enough for the knockout into Kingambit. Does hardly any damage to Rillaboom, but does get a burn onto this Kingambit. So now Ben is forced to bring his Indeedee back onto the field this next turn, which is perfect for Rillaboom to swap out with this U-turn and get rid of that Psychic Terrain once it comes back in the field.
Yeah, the terrain war now permanently won for Pat. Indeedee is going to be forced out, which just lets Rillaboom come back in. You can see how much emphasis Pat put on that by using the Terastallization not to keep the Kingambit safe, but to keep the Rillaboom safe, to make sure that Heat Wave didn't do too much damage and Rillaboom would be free to fight later on. In exchange for that, Kingambit ends up taking a bunch of damage, but critically does get the Sucker Punch onto Sneasler. If that had been Indeedee coming in on the previous turn, then that Sucker Punch would have just failed. Indeedee would have come in safely. The Terrain Wars would still be underway. The Sucker Punch lands, and now it is 2v4 and an extremely strong position for Patrick.
And now the Delphox, or Ben has not terrestrialized at all here in game 1. It has Terra Fighting as the option on both Delphox and Indeedee. You don't see Terra Fighting too often compared to some of the conventional terrestrialization types like Grass and Fire and Water and maybe Dragon and Steel. But in the matchups against Dark types, it really does help Delphox. Terra Blast, Terra Fighting, you know, helps it win those matchups better.
It absolutely can deal with these Dark types. You know, if you had to still deal with the Kingambit at full health. But yeah, you can see Ben knows the writing is on the wall. One really critical element there is there's going to be no way to protect the Delphox. Eventually, the Dragapult was going to come back out onto the field and just be faster than the Delphox. There's no follow me. That is male Indeedee, not female Indeedee,
right.
So cannot follow me. Would have just picked up the KO. And so after a couple strong turns of damage trading and winning the Heat Terrain War, Patrick takes game 1 and makes Ben have to kind of rethink game plans of how to deal with this team.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that Patrick's able to win game 1, being a little bit more defensively swapping around, trying to anticipate Ben's moves, and it's not as simple for Ben in this matchup of you are a hyper offensive team, but you're not necessarily able to just click your offensive buttons every turn because you can get punished like this Draco Meteor one-hit KOing your opposing Dragon Bolt. Then you lose the speed advantage and you lose a lot of massive amount of your damage output as well.
The role that Follow Me plays in these kinds of offense versus offense matchups is so crucial. The reason that early game was able to go in Patrick's favor and land the Draco Meteor first into the other opposing Dragapult is because of the Follow Me support. If that isn't there, right, Ben is just free to move first with his Dragapult and go for a Dragon move onto the other side. Is free to just try to Throat Chop and get rid of the Dragapult. So, but all it takes is one redirection move, and then the offensive team can't find the KO it wants to take. A lot of times, the defense for very offensive teams is moving first and taking KOs so that you don't get attacked back. One Follow Me can disrupt that game plan and start to make things fall apart. It feels like that was the key story to the early part of that first game.
And what's so great, we've seen such a rise of Electabuzz as a support Pokemon with Follow Me as just an electric type. It's only weak to ground, right? It's very hard to deal with this Eviolite, very bulky Pokemon that only has one weakness that's really not too common.
Plenty of Garchomps out in the field, but when you have it, not here. And so the Electabuzz is pretty tanky and can also support this Kingambit. Is going to have some pressure on it, though. Of course, now the close combat is a big threat into Kingambit, but can be redirected. The Dragapult may want to just U-turn off the field again to avoid getting hit by the Kingambit, but has to watch out for a Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch, a very dangerous game for both players. Psychic Terrain could just come in the Sneasler slot and block the Sucker Punch, or it could just come out and KO Dragapult if you're too careless with a U-turn. And so I think both players will have to think carefully about how much risk to allow there and what the payoff could be.
Yeah, the Psychic Terrain could come out at any point, but when you are on Ben's side, you do have to be prepared and anticipate the Rillaboom in the back like you saw in game 1. This time around leading Kingambit next to the Electabuzz instead of the Dragapult, so you have to wonder, is he saving Dragapult for later? But for now, Ben will swap his Dragapult out here on this first turn, not wanting to anticipate or go into the Sucker Punch mind games with the U-turn, just swapping it out right away into Indeedee Male, activating the Psychic Terrain, boosting Sneasler's special defense by one stage, and doubling its speed. So now it is the fastest Pokemon on the field, but it looks like Patrick is going to Terra.
Wants extra damage, wants to not be 4 times weak to close combat. But I think really critically the damage here as well, this King Gambit, if it's going to use up Electabuzz's health as a redirection Pokemon, oh no, it's not even a follow me, it's just a helping hand. This King Gambit will be doing so much damage, assuming it can make it to the end of the turn.
Oh, it's gonna do no damage. Helping Hand Sucker Punch in Psychic Terrain will fail because you can't have a priority attack while the terrain is up. That's a crit close combat into the King Gambit for the one-hit KO.
Just a devastating turn for Patrick. Everything ends up going wrong. The Sucker Punch doesn't land. There's no follow me to protect against that close combat. And then the Terrestrialization might have been enough to take the close combat, except the critical hit gets that extra bit of damage in. And so after one turn, Ben is now up 4-3, has dealt with the Terrestrialization on the other side, but also crucially, he's dealt with the Dark type on the other side. If it is, you know, there's already the NDD on the field, but if it's also the Delphox in the back, that Psy Spam is going to be so much easier to use, knowing the King Gambit's not there, and also having taken out one of the pivoting tools. It's harder to win the terrain war when you are the one who loses the first Pokemon.
Right, and with the lack of a Dark type now, as you're saying, Expanding Force, you don't care about Follow Me. Follow Me is not going to redirect a spread attack away that Expanding Force would have on both Indeedee Male and the Delphox. But Indeedee will swap out on this turn for Ben. He's already shown off the Dragapult. He will reveal his fourth Pokemon here in Game 2, which is the Delphox. Sneasler protecting here. Remember, because of the defense drops, now the special defense is back down to neutral on this Sneasler from that close combat the prior turn. So maybe it does not survive the Draco Meteor anymore.
It would not be able to survive a Draco Meteor, but can protect itself against a Draco Meteor. I've been opting on this turn. Could have just had a close combat into Electabuzz for a lot of damage. Doesn't really have much of a better option this turn than that. But now it's a choice for the Dragapult. It can only go after one of these Pokemon. You can also continue to pivot around, try to get some support back in for Delphox, maybe the Dragapult to add in extra damage, but for now, just a helping hand to support the Dragapult. All-out offense for both sides.
Electabuzz believes in the Dragapult, and it will hang on through the Throat Chop. Just barely in the red. Helping hand Draco Meteor into the Delphox is more than enough for the one-hit KO with the choice specs as well. That Dragapult does so much damage on Patrick's end. Now you can see Ben has to decide between the Dragapult and Indeedee. Indeedee, if you want to keep it around, you want to wait until Rillaboom resets the terrain to then swap Indeedee back in afterwards.
That was really the critical turn that Patrick needed to try to get back in this game. A Follow Me could have kept Dragapult healthy, but might have meant there wasn't the damage to prevent the Expanding Force on the other side. With the helping hand, Patrick's able to use the speed advantage over the Delphox, get the Draco Meteor out, and keep it from ever attacking in this game. But now there's still threat on the other side. We saw Ben lock in a Breaking Swipe, kind of an unusual move for the Dragapult, but really critical here because it'll go past the Follow Me. We expect that Ben's Dragapult is faster, and so that means the other Dragapult shouldn't have a chance to attack, even with this Follow Me coming out.
Finally, Electabuzz clicks the Follow Me to redirect the attacks, becoming the center of attention. Dire Claw goes into that spot. It is another critical hit from this Sneasler, but the Follow Me does not stop a spread attack, as we were mentioning. So Patrick's Dragapult is KO'd without attacking this turn.
A really difficult situation, assuming it is Rillaboom as the fourth Pokemon there. It's very difficult to decide to try to save the Dragapult, because if you bring in Rillaboom to take a Breaking Swipe, take a big chunk of damage, but also go down one attack step, also then probably lose the terrain war because Indeedee's in the back, it's hard to see where you win from there. So instead, Patrick opts for the riskier option, hopes it's not the Breaking Swipe coming out, tries to get a Follow Me off, but instead really just gives up so much on that turn. And so now a concession from the other side, writing on the wall once again. These are lightning fast games, as really critical first couple of turns settle it one way or the other.
Yeah, I think we're through 2 games already. Moving on to our decisive Game 3. There might be some games out in the field still in Game 1, depending on how the matchups play. But when you have 2 offensive teams like Ben and Patrick have brought here to Louisville, really nice to see just fast-paced action back and forth. You start off, it starts with that Sucker Punch. Everything was invested. Helping Hand, Terra Dark, and the Sucker Punch does nothing, and Patrick got punished with the one-hit KO.
You could see the volatility that bringing King Gambit out onto the field first brings, because it is somewhat vulnerable, despite being dark type, somewhat vulnerable to a lot of Ben's offense because of the close combats and the heat waves. And then its offense is somewhat inconsistent. If you want the Sucker Punch, if you want the big play to try to keep the Dragapult on the other side from attacking, then you have to risk so much. Before that turn one, we talked about whether either player would opt into the risk. Go ahead and click U-turn it. Go ahead and click Sucker Punch. In the end, it's Patrick who opts into the risk, goes for the big damage, hopes to get the decisive play to win game 2 and win the match by trying to get a Sucker Punch on the Dragapult, but instead it goes so poorly. Instead, you lose the King Gambit, lose the Terastallization, and even with a strong turn, the next turn, it was just already too far behind to come back. It was really easy for Ben to just trade damage back and forth. It'll be interesting to see if Patrick can find a way to introduce less volatility, maybe not bring the King Gambit when it was in the back, it has a little bit more consistent role, or just use it in a way that, you know, you just start clicking Kowtow Cleave, not investing as much in it, then you also don't risk as much with it.
The other thing Patrick has to be concerned about is we've now seen twice Ben's Dragapult outspeed Patrick's Dragapult, so that's something if he is keeping track of, you have to be prepared for. Maybe the Follow Me is that much more valuable than the Helping Hand damage, because you don't care about Breaking Swipe as a special attacker with choice specs, and you're going to need to protect it if his Dragapult's faster.
Absolutely. I think the Follow Me is just such a valuable resource, but it also means Patrick has to be really careful when to spend it. In that last game, never had the same value that it had in the first game, but some pivots up. We see the Tauros for this first time, we see the Mousehold for the first time. That Intimidate ends up landing pretty well the first time it's on the field. Yeah,
now Mousehold's going to be doing less damage because this is not the supportive version. This is the Technician and Population Bomb wide lens version of Mousehold. Going to be doing a little bit less damage there. But Tauros, the Aqua Breed version, means that Patrick left something in the back. Was it that Dragapult? Was he too worried about the speed?
If you end up deciding that your Dragapult is just slower than the other one, it's a pretty reasonable Pokemon to leave behind. It has dealt a lot of damage, and I think it's crucially faster than the Delphox. That's the risk with leaving it at home, is that you have nothing faster than the Delphox, and so that damage is really hard to mitigate. It's kind of was the checkmate in game 1, was the one strong moment for Patrick in game 2, so it'll be interesting to see how he navigates the game instead if it was left behind.
Tauros swapping out here on this turn, wants to preserve that Intimidate for later on Patrick's end. Rillaboom will swap onto the field, now activating the grassy terrain for the field, but Ben has not put Indeedee Mail onto the field yet, so at some point he can swap it onto the field and get boost to that expanding force damage. Delphox will protect this turn 1, avoiding any damage from King Gambit's Sucker Punch here, and now an Intimidated Population Bomb. So this is the Technician version where Population Bomb will do more damage because it is a low base power move. It's going to hit hopefully 10 times as Wide Lens makes it a 99% accurate move, and even with the Intimidate, that still is more than enough for a quote-unquote 2-hit KO into the Rillaboom.
Ben gets the better of that turn and dodges a really sneaky move from Patrick that could have opened up this game 1. The Rillaboom switched in as the King Gambit went for Sucker Punch. If Mousehold had switched out to the Indeedee to set Psychic Terrain and protect against the Sucker Punch, the Rillaboom switch would have happened afterwards. Because the Tauros is slower than the Mousehold, the Sucker Punch would have still landed, picked up a KO onto Delphox. But instead, the Delphox just protects itself, doesn't leave itself vulnerable to Sucker Punch, and Ben gets the better side of the turn. But a sneaky move there from Patrick that could have paid off in a huge way.
But now that it didn't, the Sucker Punch did not work out the prior turn. There are 2 fire-weak Pokemon on the field against a Life Orb Heat Wave Delphox on the other end, threatening super effective damage.
Yeah, when you go for a play and you miss, things start to look a lot more difficult. The Rillaboom has to switch right back out. Spending it in that way to switch in early, take a Population Bomb is going to make it so much harder to win the terrain war later on in this game.
Electabuzz swaps onto the field into the Rillaboom slot, so can't click Follow Me this turn since it just hit the field.
And confirms what the 4 Pokemon are, so no Dragapult in the back there.
Terra fighting on Delphox. Not the most common Terastallization type that you see in the world, but with these Psychic type Pokemon on Ben's team, this hyper offense size spam team, you want to flip the script in this matchup against those dark types. Patrick will match the Terra with a Terra Dark King Gambit. He still is weak to fighting, so if Ben went for the Terra Blast into that slot, it would be super effective. Here is the Intimidated Population Bomb from Ben's Mousehold into the King Gambit. It's doing less damage than he wants, but it could potentially bring King Gambit low enough. It does more than 50% to the King Gambit. Now it's up to the Heat Wave. It's not fully accurate, and King Gambit dodges the Heat Wave. Electabuzz hardly takes any damage from that hit. Now Kowtow Cleave in response, but Delphox is no longer a psychic type, so that's going to be resisted damage.
Both players dodging a bullet a little bit there. The Heat Wave doesn't land into King Gambit. What was a pretty good insurance play for Ben? You go for the Population Bomb. If King Gambit stays a Steel type, then is weak to Heat Wave. If it becomes purely a Dark type, then that Population Bomb does so much more damage, but then dodges the Heat Wave so it stays on the field. But then the Fighting type Terrestrialization on the other side helps Delphox then take the Kowtow Cleave, even though King Gambit is still on the field. You can see how important beating Dark types is for Ben. 2 Fighting type Terra Blasts on this team.
Electabuzz will protect, King Gambit protecting as well on this turn, so Patrick just trying to play it safe, play it easy, see what Ben is going to value. He decides to follow me instead of the Population Bomb, but not like there's going to be any damage on the field this turn anyway.
Possibly worried about a Sucker Punch there. That Kowtow Cleave did a lot of damage. Some risk that a Terrestrialization boosted Sucker Punch could have cleaned up the KO, so Follow Me would help prevent that. But instead, we just get a turn of healing all around. Everyone gets a little bit healthier, and maybe makes that KO a little less likely. Maybe then Ben's more comfortable to go out on the offense with Mousehold.
You have the Electabuzz here, at least you know that Terra Blast from Delphox is really not going to be too much of an option as long as Electabuzz is here to redirect that attack away, and that's exactly what Patrick is going for. Wants to keep his Terrestrialized Pokemon safe here in this decisive Game 3. Population Bomb goes into the Electabuzz, and that, even if it hits 10 times, it's not going to be enough, Len.
The Intimidate has provided so much value. Rillaboom, King Gambit, Electabuzz, all healthier than they otherwise would be because Tauros was out on the field on turn 1 to intimidate this Mousehold.
So Electabuzz tanks all 10 of those hits, but Heat Wave does not redirect Follow Me does not redirect a Heat Wave. Electabuzz goes down, but crucially, King Gambit will survive, and this time around does not get burned by the Heat Wave. So this is Terra Dark, Black Glasses boosted, Kowtow Cleave into the Mousehold for the one-hit KO.
Mousehold did its job though, did so much damage before going down to Kowtow Cleave there, made Patrick second guess a couple of turns because of the Follow Me support. And finally we have a game that doesn't look so decisive from its early game. Both players getting a little bit of what they want and a little bit of what they didn't want out of these first few turns. Both players still have their terrain setter in the back. Really crucial decision whether either one of them will opt to bring it on the field here. If they were to both bring it on the field, that would mean that Grassy Terrain gets set, and so a pretty pivotal moment.
It's a tough call for Ben specifically because your team, so much of the value of the team and the way that the team is constructed is around Psychic Terrain. You give Sneasler the boost to its special defense and the double speed. You give Expanding Force to both Indeedee and Delphox. But one of the reasons Rillaboom is like the #1 Pokemon in the format, on top of its own value, is its ability to shut down Psychic Terrain.
So helpful in matchups like these, and there are plenty of them, and so then both players do opt to bring their terrain setters out on the field. Here comes the Psychic Surge setting down the Psychic Terrain, but only briefly. Grassy Surge then comes in afterwards. The Rillaboom is slower than this male Indeedee, and so now Grassy Terrain back on the field. That means King Gambit is free to continue to Sucker Punch, but once again, 2 Pokemon weak to Heat Wave. Delphox, though, in Grassy Glide range. That's the problem with not having your Psychic Terrain. It's not just about all those boosts and extra damage, it's the priority protection. There are so many priority attacks available from Patrick's side, and as soon as the Psychic Terrain safety for these offensive frail Pokemon from Ben isn't there, things will look a lot more difficult to find a way to land your attacks. The Terrestrialization also meaning that Grassy Glide is neutral because you had to spend it earlier to be able to take a dark move.
Ben had not revealed his 4th Pokemon here in Game 3, so he will swap Indeedee Male out into the Sneasler. Delphox protecting on this turn, anticipating a potential Grassy Glide into that slot, and that is exactly what Patrick goes for. So Grassy Glide's not going to do any damage. The question now is, where did the Sucker Punch go into? And it would have failed either way into the Protect or the switch in on Sneasler.
Patrick tried to take it all on that turn. He wanted the Grassy Glide for a KO and a Sucker Punch to KO on the other side, but instead doesn't get any of it because the Sneasler makes the pretty safe, pretty necessary switch for Ben to try to reset the Psychic Terrain. The Delphox is going to need to attack at some point in this game, likely, for Ben to find the damage that's left. Sneasler, though, comes in a pretty strong position. Isn't that threatened by either of these Pokemon? Can, of course, threaten a KO onto either of these Pokemon because of the damage that Mousehold was able to put out earlier. Of course, Tauros, the last thing in the back for Patrick's going to be able to intimidate Sneasler, But even at -1, Sneasler can probably KO either of these Pokemon. Should be able to pretty easily KO either of these Pokemon. And Tauros itself would take a big chunk from a close combat and has to dodge any psychic moves from these two psychic Pokemon. So it starts to look like with Sneasler coming in for free there, the dominoes are set up in a way that definitely could be powerful for Ben, but it's not Sneasler attacking this turn. It's Indeedee coming in that slot and Delphox going out on the first offense.
Patrick certainly has to anticipate that Indeedee swap in to get rid of the priority boost on grassy terrain. So is he prepared for it? Yes, Rillaboom does swap out into the Paldean Tauros to keep that grassy terrain for later. As long as both of these trainers still have 3 Pokemon, they are able to keep that flexibility of which terrain is able to be set up on the field. But thanks to Psychic Terrain being here, that Sucker Punch will not work onto the Delphox. Not going to take any damage. And now an Expanding Force into the Fighting type Tauros on the other end means that Tauros is knocked out from full.
Yeah, both players do not have 3 Pokemon anymore. Rillaboom going to be forced out on the field, and crucially, that Tauros going down. The Sneasler leaves the field, doesn't get intimidated. Now the Intimidate threat is gone. Both of these Pokemon don't do that much damage to Sneasler, and Sneasler can KO either of them. And it's lurking in the back, ready to win this game at some point for Ben, but of course can't deal with both of them at the same time. He's got to get something out of these 2 Pokemon in the meantime, and is once again in that position where there are priority threats into both slots. It can just be Grassy Glide and Sucker Punch for 2 KOs, but do you risk bringing Sneasler in here? Because it is kind of your big win condition at the end. It is going to switch in though. Indeedee goes back, tries to win the Psychic, the Terrain War for the last time in this match. It's gone back and forth, but it'll eventually be Psychic Terrain as the final. But first, Sneasler comes out onto the field while Delphox protects itself.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's not as easy as just swapping Sneasler in on that turn, which is what Ben does, but you have to worry about the risk of taking damage. Grassy Glide goes into the Protect, but the Kowtow Cleave hits the Sneasler on the other end. It will be resisted as Sneasler is a fighting type, but it's not a bulky Pokemon in any sense, so it does over 50%.
Does so much damage, like you say, over 50%. That means that if Patrick had made the call in earlier turns, found it switching in, and not just failed so many Sucker Punches, it could have had the damage. But now also means the Sneasler itself is going to need the Psychic Terrain priority. It's given up that full health bar that meant it could just safely attack, and now it needs Psychic Terrain to support it. The good news is there's nothing to disrupt that Psychic Terrain anymore. No risk that Rillaboom is going to be switching in at the same time or at some point in the future. And so now it's Delphox that leaves the field, and it's Psychic Terrain support for Sneasler to open up the safe attack.
The Indeedee male will swap into Delphox's position here to keep Sneasler on the field. I like this alternative instead of keeping Delphox here. At least have Sneasler who can hit both of these Pokemon super effectively, either close combat into the Dark type King Gambit or the Dire Claw into the Grass type Rillaboom. It will be the Dire Claw for the knockout. Rillaboom is down. Patrick, just his King Gambit remaining in a 3v1 scenario, and he can't click Sucker Punch.
Can't click Sucker Punch. It will be a safe close combat in. Patrick has to make a play there, has to try to hope to protect from one Sneasler attack, but there's no reason for Ben to take any risk. The Rillaboom has the Assault Vest on the other side. It is a safe spot to put some damage and lock in Game 3 and lock in this match to go 2-0 so far.
What an exciting first game on stream here today in Louisville. Ben Grissmer is going to be able to pick up the W over our reigning NAIC champion Patrick Connors. I think Lenny really showcased how that matchup